Takes a second. What's going on, guys? Special treat this evening. By popular request, we have Leaving Babylon tonight, and we're going to talk about Satan being loose. And of course, I put question mark, but obviously, if you're in here, you know what we believe about that. Yes, he's been loose, and that's one of the reasons I had you on. So welcome to the show, Madeline.
Hi.
How's it going?
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here. Thanks, JT.
Of course. So, like I said, lots of people said you should have Leaving Babylon on your channel, and I was like, so I popped over, I watched some of your videos, and of course, like I said, you got some very thorough history videos, like basically trying to lend more evidence to the little season. First of all, how did you get to believe this way? Obviously, again, we were saying, like, as far as first, yeah, just give us a brief, like, get to know you, like your testimony on all these things.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's just, you kind of have to go back to come forward. So my background is, I've been researching this for a couple of years, but when I go back further, I grew up in a very non-denominational, like really devout Christian family, grew up in private Christian education, sort of lived on the Bible college campus. And so everything was kind of revolved around the Bible and Bible study and really good people, you know. I was very blessed in that way. But when I left the school, I guess, and sort of moved on, I ended up leaving my faith behind. I called myself an agnostic. And so that was like 2 decades of my life that were just not even thinking about the Bible, but I knew all about, you know, dispensationalism. That was kind of the eschatology that I've been raised with. And so there was a lot of, you know, that, which I think the church was just kind of trained to believe in. So from that point, my parents were actually missionaries. So there's like a whole missionary background in my family.
Oh, wow.
Very, you know, very Christian family. So I was very blessed and I did know a lot. So fast forward to 2020, when everything kind of went down, a lot of things started to stand out to me that, you know, as with you, and I think a lot of other people that I've spoken to, there's just been this huge awakening. So I was brought into that through the Holy Spirit, really. And, you know, the things that were being shared through family and stuff like that. So I think what really startled me the most is how deceived I had been. And I just could not believe, like, it just shocked me. That level of deception where you just think everything's wonderful. You know, you're just going through life and it's like, life is great, you know. And then one day you wake up and it just smacks you in the face and you just, it's almost like this 180. You're now looking in the complete opposite direction. And it's hard to believe when you hit that point. So from there, I pretty much was just driven to find out what is going on in this world, as many of us have. And that's why we're here. And so, I mean, just going way back, like, I don't think I believed in the moon hoax, the moon landing hoax ever. My brother.
Nice. So you're a skeptic from the beginning then. That's good.
Yeah. Like my dad was the original truther. So back in the 70s and the 80s, he was dissecting all of this. He knew.
So he's been a Christian truther like since way back then?
Yeah, I mean, he's passed away now, but yeah, he was doing all this stuff back in the 70s. He was like studying the Freemasons. He was studying Satanism, how it was feeding in through politics.
Dang.
And yeah. And then my eldest brother, about 30 years ago, he came out as a preterist, like a full preterist. And he was writing journals for some of the big preterist journals online. So for me, the preterist thing is kind of old hat because our family dealt with that a long time ago. So it's not really like a new concept for me, which is why I don't really talk about it, because I feel like I'm just on to other things now. And I'm okay with, you know, all of the reasons why the millennial reign happened, or, you know, the fulfillment, the historical fulfillment of prophecy. So yeah, so when I guess just getting to the millennial reign, so I was like, you know, I think that was one of the things that kind of really never made sense to me back when I was in the church, like originally. I just thought, you know, all these movies, it's just so like, scripted, right? You're just kind of led down this path, and like, this is what it is, and all these calculations, and don't worry about it. Don't think too hard about it. Just kind of go with it. So as I woke up, I realized how deceived I had been, but I also realized maybe the reasons why some of it just never really sat right with me to begin with. And so when you start discovering things like, now we're in the little season, it just, all the light bulbs go off. And I was like, wow, this is amazing, because I was already researching all the other stuff that was going on.
Yeah, that's cool, because it's like preterism. That's the word that gets brought up all the time now. So like, you know, as somebody who started making videos a couple years ago, now it's like, oh, you're a preterist now. And it's like, I hate that term, because I think that in these labels allow them to say, oh, preterism's been debunked by, like, you know, the mainstream has debunked preterism. But I'm thinking like, you can't really put us in a box like that, because obviously the people who are talking about the little season are it's way over what, if you have some classical preterists, they're not saying the same things we are. You know, they might try to allegorize many parts of the Bible. They try to say everything is spiritual, or it's this or it's that, and we're trying to say, no, we're taking things literally, and we are trying to show the evidence that the things actually took place, and we're more like we're like biblical literates, and we're historical skeptics. is what we are, because we don't trust anything else besides what the Bible says. And you can point me to some scholar who says, oh, well, he debunked that, and I was like, I don't care what he says. Like, you know, point me to the scriptures that he quoted and we'll talk about it. But I'm not even trying to do that. But I think that is cool that it said at first I thought you had a similar background to me, because you're saying you kind of grew up in a Christian home, you went to Christian schools and stuff like that. But but I had never even heard of preterism until like 3 years ago.
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, there was a big wave. I think you had Bible Scribe on recently, and he mentioned that he was going back and reading some of the old, like, stuff that was written back in the 90s or early 2000s. And that was sort of like the 90s is when my brother was all over this stuff. But as you say, for me, it's like one coin, and futurism's on one side and preterism is on the other. So they just kind of flip what they're symbolized, like what they're taking as symbolic or allegory, and or metaphor, like, and so they're doing the same thing.
Yes, yeah. You're correct, because I've had people that I've talked to about that, where they try to say that heaven and earth are actually allegories, and you're like, but where do you get that from? You know, like, just use the text. Like, can you use the text and try to prove that to me? Because it's like every other place that heaven and earth are used, I believe they're literal heaven and earth. So why would you say if that passes away? And then they try to say everything's been fulfilled, or, oh, that doesn't mean this doesn't mean. I'm like, okay, well, where do you get that from? And it likely is that I think that's why I think most people like me, when I first heard about classical preterism, I was like, no, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't like that idea. And so, like, looking for somebody to debunk it real fast, saying, oh, well, Revelation was written in 95. Okay, well, then they're obviously they're wrong. I know they're wrong about the things they tried to allegorize. So then I'm not even going to look into it until you finally get presented in like I said, I think I saw one of my Alpha Talks. I remember when I did a deep dive down his videos, and I was like, oh man, he's like laying out all the physical evidence, the verses, and all together. And like, now that I can actually understand and believe, but no, I can't. You don't get to pick and choose where the allegories are. You let Scripture interpret Scripture, and that's the way I want to go.
Yeah, you guys, you and Alpha Talks are really good at that. I really appreciate all the work you guys do on that. And I think one of the things I just want to mention is preterists have no general knowledge of what we're doing here, which is the millennial reign little season thing, taken from the perspective of the visual evidence of the old world and that whole like thing. They're just not aware. Like, I showed my brother, I went downtown in my city here, and I took video evidence of all the mud flood stuff, which is really, really, like, it's extreme here.
Everywhere. So where are you located at?
On the west coast of Canada, so Vancouver Island.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that would probably be one of the places where, like, it would make no sense that there's really old stuff there, right?
Exactly. Like, but when you look at the old pictures of this city, they're exactly like old pictures of Boston, old pictures of New York, old pictures of like everywhere. So, but the mud flood is very evident. Like you go down to the waterfront and you turn around and the street level is 2 stories above where you're standing. And then there's a brick wall there underneath the street and there's windows in it, like window frames in the brick.
Unbelievable. I mean, it's like it's unbelievable I mean, it really is everywhere. That's what I was saying. It's funny. Like we even talked about like, so when I did the movie Ancient Angels and we're talking about like Nephilim and giants and weird things. And obviously, you know, giants is an easy explanation for a lot of big things that are everywhere. And then you go over to like Easter Island. So you have those Moai statues. And then they're just like recently, hey, guess what? They have bodies. Yeah, they're like buried. I mean, they're like buried 20 feet under the ground. And so like on this little island that they're also buried, like that is, I mean, it really is insane. Like the scope of the things that are buried all around the whole world. And history does not write about it. There's like no historians talking about it. There's no, they don't even try to explain it.
Yeah. Do you want to hear my theory about why they did that?
I'd love to.
Okay. So I have a series called Technocratic Takeovers, and I've only got 2 in there right now. I'll be making more, but so I go through how the old world had natural gas supply. So there was that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you know how the rail network is evidential all over the world, and there's no possible way that with the numbers of population they give us that they could have possibly built all of that with all of their logistic issues that they must have had, and you know, all of that. So if you look at that, but you get a map of the natural gas supply all over the world, actually, but if you just look at the States, for example, the United States, you'll see there's just millions of miles of network of gas supply, natural gas. And they knew where all the deposit or the reservoirs were, right? So all of the natural gas deposits, they were plumbed into that. That was all plumbed into the cities and the local areas. And they have been dismantling that. So what I think is that they had natural ether, the electrical supply, and then you had natural gas. Well, like a lot of that supply would have come underneath the buildings, right? The original.
Okay. Sure.
So they would have been plumbed in from underneath. And I think what they did was they had to flood the buildings at least 2 levels so that they could cover up all of that supply. And then they could strip the buildings out from inside and they could take off all of the ornamental like ether collection power supplies from the top. And then they could just rebuild the buildings from the inside and plumb in all the new electricity that would have been sort of managed through wires and stuff like that.
But where did the mud come from?
I have theories about that too. So I've been investigating in my local area, and so they built a lot of dams all over the world. So they would have dammed up certain valleys. They would have dammed up lakes or made man-made lakes, right? And so we have a number of lakes that were dammed up or man-made. So they would have been a river, they'd have been made a dam, and they're always at a bit of an elevation above the city. And then there's reservoirs that actually were holding tons of water up in those areas too. So this is all dotted around the city. And then I found a news report that back in the day, they were like, they make up these stories, right? So they're like, how do we get fresh water supply into the city? And then they make this whole big deal about how are we going to get water supply? So it becomes this kind of narrative that people are like, oh, it's okay. They're just damming for water so we can have drinking water. Well, I think what they did was they actually dammed up all these lakes. There was these like water containers all over the place. And I think they just let it all go and maybe cause some of the natural or not natural, but like man-made liquefaction at the same time.
Well, that's an interesting theory, because when I first started kind of looking into architecture before I went to the old world stuff, I did it. Like one of my biggest videos on TikTok was about the Hoover Dam. And so I started going down the rabbit hole about the angels on the dam and all the weird stuff about it. And then I was then people were saying, hey, you need to watch this movie. And eventually somebody said, you got to watch Frozen 2. And I was like, really?
Yeah.
I was like, okay. But then I started to watch it, and man, like the connections between Frozen 2 and the Hoover Dam were just unbelievable. But I mean, like literally that movie is the weirdest kids movie you've ever seen. Like it makes no sense. You think about like you have the Disney had a automatic hit on their hands by making a second Frozen movie as big as that first one was. They could have done any kind of generic princess movie and everyone went to see it because the first one was so big. Well, they made the weirdest, esoteric, just strange movie where like literally the villain in the movie was somebody who was already dead and his legacy was this dam. And so they had, at some point, they came to the conclusion the dam needs to be destroyed. And then all the water comes rushing at the city, Arendelle or whatever. And you're like, that is such a weird movie. But yeah, and obviously, like as somebody who looked into the Hoover Dam, you have all the predictive programming about like the $50 bill, you fold it up, it looks like the Hoover Dam's breaking and all this kind of stuff like that. It's like, there's been weird things that people have thought. I mean, I remember after 9/11, lots of people speculated that was that could be the next target after the trade centers. And you're like, because I do remember that. It's before I woke up. I thought, oh wow, that would be something, I guess. I mean, it's like, I guess it's a big deal. But yeah, like what's the significance of these dams? But yeah, they're everywhere. And over the past couple of years, I did see that they're talking about removing some of them. And I mean, not like that, but yeah, that's an interesting idea though, for sure.
Yeah, I do think that's what they did. Just having looked at my local area, obviously I haven't looked all over the world, but you'll see, if you look maybe locally, you might find like a water story in the news back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so I go through as many of the archive pictures as I can find as well, just to line up, okay, what buildings were there at that time and what did the water line look like? And it's really weird. In my city, they actually have some strange like art style, I don't know how to describe it, but like little works of art all over the city. And one of them, it's right on the waterfront. So where the rocks are going down to the water. And I didn't even know it was there. I just like walking along and I nearly tripped over it. And it's these two hands coming out of the rock and they're clinging on to like I don't know, like a rope or something, but it's all made of iron. So it's just really weird. It's almost like this person got flooded into the rock or melted into the rock.
Yeah, that's
very strange.
That is bizarre. But no, I think that it's obviously there's something to it. And like, I guess the main thing is like the strange part about like the whole mud flood stuff is, like I said, it is everywhere. I mean, I think that's like the thing where like I cannot get over that there really is no explanation for it. And if you try to Google mud flood or web search it, and you'll get a bunch of things saying it's a crazy conspiracy theory, but like they literally offer no answers for these things. And I do wonder, like, so you think that there was a time when Satan was let loose, that the controllers, obviously the people he obviously worked with, decided to do this to try to hide the millennial reign? Is that your theory on this?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there was always an evil group of people that during the millennial reign, they would have been kind of hiding in the shadows and just hanging out, knowing, they were committed to evil as far as I'm concerned. I think they were around, but they knew it wasn't their time yet, right? So, but just think about it. If you had your millennial reign, and we know that the priests and kings were prophesied to rule and reign the earth with Christ, which is exactly what happened. The nobility and then the church, and they reigned with Christ. That's exactly what happened for 1,000 years. But just imagine when they left, how much real estate was left over. So
right.
I just think if you're not really a person of faith and you really don't want to go along with, Christ and his laws, and that's just not your thing. And it just says, their hearts are darkened. They just don't get it, do they? And so I think that at the time of handover, there would have just been this massive real estate opportunity. And I think that's where all of these robber barons came in. They were kind of in some way prepared for it. I mean, some people say, oh, did they come out of the caves? Were they all hiding underground? I don't really have a theory on that, but I think they were waiting, right?
Well, it's funny. I'm supposed to do a live stream with Jay Dreams on Thursday, and we're going to talk about Fallout again. And I was saying, like, so I don't know if you're aware of that show, but it's based on a video game, and the whole thing is about them, like, literally the corporations caused the apocalypse, and before they did that, they're the ones who built the bunkers. And so, like, it showed like there's people who are bunker people who have been underground for 200 years. And I started to wonder, like, that if you think about it, there's so much evidence of things under the ground. We talk about Cappadocia, Turkey. Alpha Talks and I did that you have, like, under the melted stuff. There's places where there's caves and stuff that can hold 20,000 people. I mean, you think about as above, so below. Like, people talk about Egypt and how much stuff's under Egypt. You realize, like, there's underground cities, and of course that could be just because they're buried. But like what is under the ground? And the answer is, like, no telling. Probably a lot. So I mean, I do wonder that, like, if they knew, and of course, like I said, if you think about, like, if there's truth in these movies, where it sounds like you, obviously, I was watching some of your videos, you're kind of about that too, where they're showing you true things through fictional stories. Like, is it possible that they are showing you that this apocalypse was caused by the people, the merchants, in order to benefit from it? And as I saw somebody, my question about, like, why would they hide the technology, is that, well, if you did have free energy, what if you were trying to sell petroleum to people? Like, well, you can't really sell anything you can't sell anything that's free. And it's obviously everyone has it, unless you get rid of it and then you reintroduce something else and act like it's a new thing, when it does seem like whatever they do now, it seems totally backward. You know, if you look at our electronics and then you look at how our engines work and all this, and how our power plants are powered, it seems pretty backwards, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I just think they saw that opportunity to make, it says you can't serve God and mammon, and I think they serve mammon. They literally serve mammon. They want it all, and they want to rule it all. They want to control everything. They're literally out to, and I think they also, maybe at the higher levels, like where Lucifer actually is, they see it as an opportunity to challenge God again for the throne, maybe, you know, like through NASA and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So do you believe that? And I've wondered this, and I said, obviously, I haven't thought too deeply about it yet, but, like, we just know that Satan is let out of the pit, or he's allowed to get out. You know, is it possible that God allowed men to somehow release him? You know, some other kind of means. So is it possible that either they knew the timeline when the 1,000 years was over and it was just going to happen, or is it possible that toward the end of the 1,000 years, you know, like, God allowed men to let him out, and then it all corresponded with the same thing?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, but it's interesting. My last video that I just did, Victor Hugo, who I've never really read much of. I only know him. I think he's for the Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Mis and some of those sort of Victorian era French work. But he, I found a document that he had written. It's an epic, and it's actually called The End of Satan. And it describes the angel of liberty going down to the depths of the abyss and waking him up and rousing him out of his imprisonment. And then, and weirdly enough, it actually includes the storming of the Bastille. So that's kind of what I was trying to put together at the end of my video, was that there's this, and I think throughout the ages, throughout the Bible, we see this where, okay, so human consent is a huge thing, right? So for God to actually come into our lives, he knocks at the door, Jesus knocks at the door, and we consent to let him in. And I think the same goes for evil. You know, you let evil into your life. You know, you can become possessed. You somehow open those doors. And I think that's a really important, I think Dr. Heiser actually talked about that a little bit, where there's this kind of legal system in the spiritual realm, and humanity has to give consent, which is why deception is such a huge part of this, where I think man and God, or man and the fallen angels, they work together to accomplish. And so it's all about, not that God's coercing, because God isn't doing that, but the fallen ones are definitely coercing humanity to make decisions, whether it be through deception or whether it be through fear or whatever it might be, to make these decisions of consent. And so I think once people buy into a certain evil agenda, they're now on that team, and they will do the things that a human would have to do in place of, like, you know, a fallen angel, you know. So like, say things that are happening in the movie industry or whatever, to coerce more of humanity down that path. So I think there was probably a combination of things. Like, we look at Aleister Crowley would be an example of somebody that the enemy would be using to manipulate things, right? So he's very involved in the Catholic Church, for example, which probably is highly contentious issue, but you know, he was involved with Catholics. And so, you know, you start to see this thread, and I kind of was describing it to my daughter as the Antichrist shadow. It kind of knows the key things to look out for in terms of prophecy, but God's always like 10 steps ahead. And so you kind of see this interplay of the shadow with the line of the, you know, the seed of the woman, if you will, like Jesus. And so in terms of loosing of Satan, like, I think it was something spiritual. Whether they had to do like mass human sacrifice, I don't know. Like, I don't know what that would have taken for them to do, but I'm chasing down some of the threads on that, because I don't actually have like a full picture of what that would look like yet. But I know that the French Revolution definitely played a huge part, shall we say. And you know that 1776, the year 1776?
Of course, yes.
It's very significant because it's just kind of everywhere. You know, you've got the Illuminati was formed. You've got the Declaration of Independence. And the New York City fire was on that year as well. So like 3 major events at least. And, you know, there's a few more in there too. But I think that 1776 is probably the date we're looking at for the release of Satan. I was really skeptical of that date originally, because I was like, wow, that seems way too obvious. Like, I don't know. But as I've been looking at
it does and it doesn't. Because I mean, obviously, I feel there's one thing these people aren't, but they're pretty bold when you actually kind of understand their language. But I started to think, I couldn't help it when you were talking about, you know, like Lady Liberty and like the spirit of liberty or whatever, the angel of liberty. Well, so obviously in the book of Revelation, it's an angel that's tasked with binding Satan up and sticking him in the pit. So it would obviously make sense again that if an angel let him out, just like an angel lets Apollyon out in Revelation 9. So is it possible that it's funny because I'm almost kind of like just thinking out loud that at first I was thinking like the Statue of Liberty is a image of the devil. But what if the Statue of Liberty is literally just an image of the angel who let him out? You know, because it's like there's this Lady Liberty, and it's like she's freeing their king in some kind of way. I mean, I think it'd be either or, but I do think it's interesting we're talking about that, like that. What your first video on Satan being loose, you mentioned that movie, The Fifth Element, and so in that movie, if you guys have not seen that, I was rewatching it. I remember just like when I was like in high school, I watched it and I was like, this is weird. Like this is like, I just remember thinking this is a bizarre movie. Wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. I thought Chris Tucker's acting so awful. He obviously earned his Illuminati card by playing that role, whatever. Yeah. But yeah, so in that movie, like the one of the supreme beings was supposedly a male. And then when like through some kind of technology is recreated, becomes this woman. And so there's all this, you know, so obviously if you guys pay attention what month it is. You guys know all the stuff that's going on in the culture. We don't have to even get into all that. But like you think about the superhero movies where it's like, we even talked about like Captain Marvel. So Captain Marvel in the comic books, originally, when I collected comic books, was a man. And then eventually Captain Marvel became like obviously one of the least charismatic, unpopular characters ever in the new Marvel movies. They made her a woman. They made him a woman. And so Captain Marvel has a insignia on her chest, and it's the symbol for the star Venus. And so I was saying, like in the Wisdom of Solomon, Beelzebul is the prince of demons and is associated with Hesperus, the Greek word for the star Venus. And so there, at no point when you read that would you ever assume that that was a female. But because again, it's the prince of demons. I don't know, but the princess of demons. I don't know. Point being is that like, is that possibly why that like that maybe Satan was viewed as a male, you know, pre-millennial reign, and now like that is that why we're seeing the image of the Baphomet? Is that there's this transformation, and that's what they're trying to show us.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of the return of the Roman gods, right? And I was reading somewhere that the original, so like the Caesars used to dress up like women because they were representing Venus, and so I think that cross-dressing thing has always been a thing. When I was reading the Victor Hugo piece on the end of Satan, he actually describes Lilith, so she's a separate demon, and she's actually down there in the abyss, overlooking the imprisonment of
the mother of demons, Lilith, right?
Yeah. So she's down there overlooking Satan in his imprisonment, and she kind of has to allow this angel of liberty to come down and actually do the releasing. And it's really just this angel of liberty talking to Satan. I feel like Baphomet is a really new god. Like I don't feel like we've seen that particular entity in the previous to the millennial reign.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. So you have these secret societies. Was it particularly like the Knights Templar worshiping this very odd thing when it is there some kind of was there some kind of transformation happening during those times where they're obviously, you know, burning them at the stake because they were worshiping the devil, basically.
Yeah, and it's kind of that mixture of the goat and like the male and female aspects, and then it's got wings, and yeah, it's a really strange entity. It's really ugly, and like a lot of the other representations of what they have, if you look at all the old gods, they're actually quite attractive, right? So it's kind of weird because it's such an ugly creature.
Right. Yeah, indeed. Like, yeah, because it's kind of like you can kind of get why you would revere Thor or Zeus or, you know, obviously there's the whole meme of like, oh, person's got a body like a Greek god. Yeah. You know, so obviously the Greeks had obviously an eye for beauty in that kind of way. So why would you ever see like, this is your god now? You're like,
I know. It's
really? So that doesn't look as good as this person next to me. Like, why would you ever worship that as a god? It's obviously a representation, and it's probably like everything else that they do. There's a code to it. It's not just as it seems. This represents something else, which could represent what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, and I also think back to, I think there's something to when Jesus ascended and he unseated all of the principalities and powers. And so I wonder if something happened that those really more angelic beings were no longer around. And this is some kind of alchemy, right? Because they worship that whole alchemical hermetic principle in where you're blending things, you're making things. And I wonder if it's because of that. And, you know, it could be a genuine, real being. Like,
yeah,
you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another possibility for sure. I mean, you think about like, you know, in the Bible, so like obviously if you read in the book of Enoch, it mentions all the fallen watchers' names. And Azazel, who's one of the head watchers, is literally mentioned by name in the book of Leviticus. For the Day of Atonement, you send out the sin offering to the wilderness to Azazel. And you're like, and they literally calls him a goat demon. I mean, that sounds pretty much like what you might figure Pan to be like, but obviously the Baphomet is kind of like that. But I mean, you see, like, obviously the secret societies revere Lucifer because they would say, well, the Bible has him wrong. He really is the god of light and knowledge, like Apollo, like the sun god. He's like Helios. But obviously, like, that is not again, you don't have to, we don't even have to tell you that that's an abomination what they draw. So, like, yeah, why would anyone revere that at any point other than it's a being that does have power to grant you the things of the world, which, you know, like, if you wouldn't care who's giving you all the things if you were just in search of fleshly things.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just so like, that whole alchemy thing seems to be not, I guess it's probably not new, but I guess if you went back to the original Hermeticism, they had their own version of alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that everything that we have after the 1500s, like all of the science, all of this, you know, it's all to kind of create an alchemical process, even in the minds of children who don't even realize that's what's happening to their minds. You know, it's like a spell. So I think just going back to the release of Satan, I think he was a beautiful being, and he is. I mean, I think Lucifer is alive and well right now. I think he's walking around us. He's being transformed into an angel of light because that's what he does, and he's fooling the world. He's deceiving the world. But yeah, where this gender confusion comes in, I just think that is part of that whole chaos theory too. Like, because our minds and our bodies and our thinking is structured around the way God made us, if you start confusing the very fundamentals of our creation, you create chaos from the from the very foundation of a child, you know, the way that they think. And so I think all of that is just a lot of enchantment, you know. But yeah, as far as why they do that, it's very confusing to me. I think you'd have to be like pretty steeped in their teaching to understand how that all makes sense. I think they're insane, personally. Like, I just think there's a certain level of insanity there that sets in after a while. When you start reading nonsense enough, you get infected by it.
Sure, but it's interesting. I just learned something recently about Doc Marquis, and he was in the Illuminati, and at some point he became a born again Christian, and he used to speak out about the secret societies and what they believe. What's fascinating to me to learn is that he was saying that in the upper levels, they believe the reason they worship Lucifer is because they do believe that Jesus came back, and they do believe he's gone. So therefore they worship the God who's here. And I was like, that is, I mean, I guess it's like, it's not too surprising, but I guess when you put it on the nose like that, you're like, wow, like, that is kind of wild. And you do wonder, because I mean, those of us who believe that we're in the little season, we know that certain people know this. We know that because obviously if somebody hid something, well, then obviously they had to know what they were hiding. I know a lot of people, like in the secret societies, have only a certain level of initiated know the ultimate things they're talking about. But it is kind of like when you hear that, you're like, wow, like, okay. I mean, I guess like it almost adds a little bit more of like that they're kind of crazy like a fox in some kind of way.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and it all also feeds off of the teachings of evolution. Like, we all just come from animals, you know, we've just evolved, and there's no real purpose past our temporal existence. So like, we're very much just a time-based being, and just get as much as you can out of that. I think once you buy into those concepts, you're pretty much an open target for any deception. You know, I bought into that stuff for a while, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, I was kind of open to just believing anything. Sadly.
Well, I think that's the one thing you do see more and more now, of like that, like the mixing. And I think maybe this is why like religion is such a dangerous thing, is because like that when you're just in religion, well, then you can obviously craft it to whatever you want it to be. And you like, if you really lack a relation with God, your relationship is what you claim it to be. You're like, well, I go to church, I'm a good person, so therefore I can, I don't really agree with what the pastor said, but I'm still good. Like this is what people do. They rationalize everything. That's why I said I just released a video as after Alpha Talks and I did that podcast about all the evidence of the unrepentant cities, the book, the cities in the books of Revelation, the churches, how they like literally they're buried under the ground. Like they had to dig up the ruins. Like not only were they dug them up and they were melted looking.
Yeah.
I mean, just like try to wrap your mind around that. And like when you present that kind of information to people who claim to believe the Bible, they call you a heretic. like, what do you want? Like, what do you want me to do? Is like, I looked these things up and I found this to be true. It's like, so like, I'm not saying you have to believe what I believe, but what I'm saying is you do have to give an answer to what the Bible says and what the evidence is, of the prophecies that are in the Bible. But people can have a way of just denying it. And I mean, I really don't know what you can do about that other than just say, like the whole Jesus quoting Isaiah saying, they're going to look but not see. They're going to hear but not understand. And you're like, that, if that's not true, I don't know what is.
I agree with you. And I think that something I'm realizing is that both dispensationalism and preterism, full preterism, are based on intellectual, like an intellectualism of the Bible, which I think undermines faith. And so my perspective, and this is just exactly to your point of what you said, which I was reading earlier, I think at the book of Mark, where Jesus was like, I tell parables because if you have faith, you'll understand. And if you don't understand, then you're not going to get it, So I think there's just also different levels of, we have to speak the truth. That's the key, is we have to speak the truth because, yes, there are different layers of cognitive dissonance, right? And I think it almost takes repetition for some people to accustomize to an idea. At first you reject it, right? It's like, I've done that.
Right. Oh yeah. That's what I say. That's when I first heard about the little C's and I was like, oh no, that's insane. Jesus already came back. No way.
Yeah. Or like the biblical cosmology, what flat earth, like at first you're like, what? That's so dumb. Like, why are people so stupid? And then you realize like, oh, actually.
Oh gosh, they're right.
That might be true. So I think there's like, people have different levels of their willingness to believe something. And it might be health-based for some people. They might just jump straight on the bandwagon. Yeah. All these chemicals, don't use toothpaste, all this stuff. They might, like, from a health perspective, they might be kind of considered to be like conspiracy theorists, right? Like
right.
chemtrails and all this stuff. But then you might say to them, oh yeah, that's the firmament that rocket just hit right there. And they'll be like, oh, you're so stupid. Why are you so dumb? Right. And then you're like, well, just give it some time. And, I'm just going to keep saying this because over time you might actually realize that the more you look at it, the more question marks you get. Right.
Oh, I love that. Because that's what somebody told me once. So like I was saying, I'm not shy about sharing my testimony on here, that when I first felt compelled to make videos, and I said, I always tell everybody out there who likes the stuff we make and the things, like, nobody starts off as a finished product. I'm sure Madeline and I will both tell you we are far from finished. I want to keep learning. I'll tell you, I don't really know that much. I know a lot. I know a little bit about a lot of things. I could be wrong about lots of things. But when you first start to, like, the Holy Spirit's leading you to be vocal, He's not going to wait till you know everything, because obviously, again, we would never make any videos if we knew everything. Just be truthful that you don't know, and this is your best thoughts about at the time. But so I started going down the rabbit hole, and I was looking into all the different conspiracies, and they were like, JT, what about the Earth? Do you think it's a ball or you think it's flat? And I was like, I'm a ball earther. And then I had somebody say, you'll get there. And I remember thinking, like, what do you mean you won't get there? I'm there. I'm like, I know it's true. And it was like, but I liked that they said that, because it was almost like that. It almost felt like it was a respect of me, that if you are honest with yourself and you really do care what's true, eventually you will get there. So I think that when you have people who are not quite getting, especially the little season thing, because it's a hard pill to swallow. Give people room to grow into it. Like, you cannot force feed this kind of stuff, because like it's just not going to work. So like, allow people time to plant a seed in them, walk away. Then when they come back to you, plant another seed, know when to stop. Know when to stop watering that seed. Don't try to water it with a fire hose, because nothing grows like that. Just let it marinate. And then when they come back, because I have had a lot of people recently, I have so many people that call me a heretic day to day, but then I have other people say, you know what you're saying is finally starting to set in. It's starting to make sense, because I think that we are here speaking what we believe to be the truth, and it's either going to resonate or it's not. And I'm not trying to go into pre-trib videos and say, y'all, you guys are crazy. First of all, there's no rapture. There never was when there wasn't a pre-trib. But like, I'm not doing that, because like, who's going to be won over by that? Right.
Yeah. And I think I look for opportunities as well. So like, as things start to break down, as the narrative is definitely going to do, the official narrative will break down, just like it did with a lot of other things, as it is with a lot of other things. I think the whole space scam is really falling apart right before our eyes.
Oh, do you see China just landed on the dark side of the moon again?
How many times is that now?
Yeah. I saw their flag up. It looked again, where's the stars at? It's like, it really, I mean, this is embarrassing. I mean, it's got to be embarrassing to defend this day to day.
Yeah. And, you see like, okay, at some point people have to say, okay, now SpaceX has shot 350 rockets up there, but they're not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like just take a second and just sit with that. Like, they're not going anywhere. They're just shooting rockets. So
what about the time Elon shot the car into space?
Yeah.
And the reason it was real is because it looked so fake. So you knew it was real because it looked so fake. And you're like,
and
they're laughing at you. They're mocking you when they do that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's but I think it will fall apart the more and more. It's like a dam. It's just going to break, I think, on certain things. I think the biblical cosmology thing is going to make the church start really sitting up and paying attention to like it did for the rest of us, right? I think it's just going to get to the point where I pray for the church more than anything, because I think that the church is God's presence in this world, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that evil increases because the church is so asleep. Like, it's so like dozy, right? Just kind of like going along with lots of things. I mean, you hear it, they still told a line on the whole space lie, even though, it's just because this kind of education has been put out there. But and believing scientists over the Bible and all of that stuff, I think it's going to bring a lot of shame actually to the church when things start to come out in greater quantity, if you will. Like, I just think more and more and more people in congregations are just going to be like louder and louder and louder, and they're going to have to start talking about it. And then it's like, okay, well, now what does the church believe? Is it going to go with science still, or is it going to go with the Bible? And that's going to be a huge deciding factor. And even just materialism in our society, Western culture particularly, is that we ascribe so much to materialism, we don't even realize it. And what if it comes to the point where it's like, okay, we definitely know Jesus is, I don't know, a certain location, the Camp of the Saints is a certain location. Are you actually going to leave your house, your car, everything that you worked for, your job, to go to the kingdom, to go and be with God? Or are you going to cling to the things of this earth? And I think that is going to be a dividing line between the sheep and the goats, right?
Mm. Well, no, I think you're right on. I had another content creator friend who made a video about this, and he was saying that the biblical cosmology is sort of a dividing rod on like who believes what the Bible says or doesn't. Because I think that there's lots of very hard spiritual concepts that people widely accept because it is acceptable to believe them. But then there's things that are honestly, they're not as crazy as some of the other things we believe about the stuff about God sending his son, being born to a virgin, rising from the dead, and sending into heaven, coming back, all that kind of stuff. Like that's widely accepted. But then you try to talk to him about like angels impregnating women and creating a race of giants. It's like, why is that so hard to believe? Like,
Yeah.
why is it so hard to believe that the demons literally influence people? I mean, people like just don't want to believe that the Taylor Swift could be influenced by demons when you're like, to people who are awake, you're like, well, it's pretty obvious. Like she's like, do you think she's that famous because she's super talented? Come on now.
Yeah.
But no,
Yeah.
when it comes down to like, what I think to me, the dividing rod is like the Bible says something very plain and simple. And if you say you believe it, you're going to be called an idiot. You know, so I think that, so if you're willing to say, I don't care what you say, like honestly, I saw, they had Dr. Science up there in front of Congress getting like read the Riot Act when it's like, obviously the dog and pony show, they got Fauci out there saying all the things that he said weren't true. We're like, hey, guess what? We all knew the things he was saying wasn't true. Okay, so what are you guys going to do about it? Nothing? Okay, right. Okay, so election year, I guess. But he to me is like, okay, so when people say, you don't believe in dinosaurs, you don't believe in science, you don't believe in all the NASA stuff, and I'm like, how many times did you listen to that guy? Because I think anybody who is paying attention knows that he was wrong from the very beginning. You don't have to hear it in front of Congress today. And so, like, if that's your litmus test for what science is, I am very happy to just say, I believe the Bible. I trust what the Bible says, and let everything else, like I said, let's just say I might even be wrong about my interpretations about the Bible says, but I'm much happier going before God's throne one day saying, this is what I believed it to mean, and I believed it because I believe you said it, versus some guy trying to convince me that the Bible actually doesn't say what it actually says. It's like, oh, it's actually the firmament's just clouds. You're like, no, it's not. It's not just clouds. Like, no, when Joshua told the sun and the moon to stop, he didn't tell the earth to stop spinning. He told them to stop. It seems it's very plain as day. And so then I think that's the cool thing is like that I had to kind of accept that first before I was willing to accept that, Jesus does kind of sound like he's talking to them. What if he's just talking to them? And I said, I shared that meme again on my Instagram about, it's perfect. I said, I don't know if you saw that clip I posted. It was a clip from Jesus of Nazareth, the movie. And he is obviously laying into the Pharisees. And it's funny, sometimes when you read, you don't quite get the full effect. And it's like, when you actually read what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, it does sound like he's getting his voice is being raised. He's mad. He's literally saying they're going to go to hell. He's like, so he's in the temple. And so when you see in that context, and he's saying like that, you see these stones, there's not going to be one left on top of the other. He says, your house is going to be left into as a desolation. And you're like, okay, so are you making the connections? And of course, I show all those clips and how he's so mad. He's reading them the Riot Act. And then right after that, I post the meme of Matthew 24, the disciples saying, whew, I'm glad he's not talking to us. Like
I saw that.
But what about us, Jesus? Like, are you going to have anything to do? Like when we ask you when, what about us though? Not the people for 2,000 years from now. It's like, it is unbelievable. Like I laugh because I was once one of those people who said, the olive tree generation, that must be 1948 Israel. Like, no, it's not.
No, and even just when you look at like who owns Israel, like not only do the Rothschilds own Israel, like the land, but there's a mosque right in the middle of the city. And yet you have Christians like so excited at this quote unquote holy land. To me, it is such a blasphemy of what God actually intended. And just the fact that it's now I'm sort of, I see the point about if it was historical Jerusalem and Israel there, and then God laid it waste, then that kind of makes sense in the sense
it's pretty desolate now, isn't it? I mean, that's the funny thing that I was saying. I was actually just thinking about this today, that like, so what we're supposed to believe, because the futurists say there needs to be an Antichrist going into a temple, so there has to be another temple, so that God prophesied this. It was not in the Bible. Like I said, this is the third temple stuff is not in the Bible. So what we're led to believe is that God wants them to build a temple just so they can desecrate it. You know what I mean? Like that's literally what the futurists have to believe, is that the only purpose of this temple for him is not for him. It's to be called that it's his temple, but then just to be desecrated by some man.
Yeah.
Like that's what we're supposed to believe. It's like, does that sound stupid to anyone else? Does that sound like, is our God the God of confusion? Like, so why would he want that with these completely unrepentant people to build a temple for something else besides him? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah. And I ask people directly, I'm like, do you actually understand the gospel? Do you understand what the new covenant is? Like, do you even, like, tell me what you think it meant when Jesus died. Tell me what you think when, you know, what that meant in terms of the veil being torn and, you know, the Holy Spirit coming and all of the ascension of Christ, you know, to the right hand of the Father. Like, what do you think actually happened? And put that together with what you're telling me now, because it doesn't make any sense. Like, but yeah, I just think that the church, the doctrines of the church are so corrupt, and that was part of the agenda of the great deception of the world, right? And so, you know, when you talk about kind of the repopulation programs that I believe that the robber barons, the technocratic elites actually forced humanity to go in different areas. You know, they did all these migrations of people and moved children around the world and built working classes in different areas. I think somewhere in there, the church still remained the church. You know, like I believe that the Spirit of God never left us. You know, there was a contingent of people that carried on with the truth of the gospel. But, you know, when you talk about the war of the saints, there is a war. There's a war on information. There's a war on the gospel. There's a war on understanding the time in which we live. You know, the calendars have all been changed. There's so much that has happened, you know, the burning down of the cities, the covering up of the free energy. You know, we could just go on and on. And just to go back to the point about the location of Jerusalem, I mean, I believe that's part of the Great Deception. I actually think the North is, for me, and I'm just like researching this, so I don't have any definitive answers right now, but I think the North, if you look on really old maps, like from the 1300s, the 1200s, and that sort of era, they do show Jerusalem in this central position with like water around it and all the nations around it. And so I think there is something to that we have to really get our heads around. But I do suspect that that's where maybe the camp of the saints is right now, and that there's just this kind of barrier, like natural God-made barrier in between us and there. There might be a way in, which is something I'm trying to figure out as well. It's just part of what I do. I try and find out things that really interest me. But yeah, like the Book of Enoch talks about portals, for example, and then we know that Jacob, when he lay down and he was dreaming, he saw this ladder going up and down. And then we have Nathaniel being told, you will see the Son of Man, you know.
Angels ascending and descending. It's kind of a weird way he phrased it. Angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Like, it does sound like the Jacob's ladder, like that was in Bethel.
Yeah.
is where the place where heaven was opened.
That's right. So that's a lot of what I'm looking at. And I am actually looking at the north for a lot of that, because I believe that the north is much more, it's very like everything you hear about the north, it's like, oh, it's really hostile, don't bother going there, you know, the weather's terrible, you'll never make it, you'll die trying. And they do, like, even reality TV shows, they have something called the most dangerous catch, I think it's called, and it's
the way they had deadliest catch. I remember watching like fishing shows about like the North Atlantic, and I mean, obviously it's, I mean, I think most people don't really like the cold much, so they don't have to be talked out of wanting to go some. I mean, I mean, you think about it, like biblically, the sea is like death. I mean, like I think that like there's the deep, the sea is related to hell, literally. Like the deep goes, you know, under the earth, and so like there is this obviously scariness about going across like the ends. I mean, again, it's funny, like that sometimes we don't even think too hard about it. The ends of the earth. So people who mock the flat earth will say, oh, there's an end. It's like, yeah, the end is where you go to the land. When you go to the beach, you just got to the end of the earth, because now the sea starts. It's like they're two different things. They're not the same thing. And so, yeah, I think that I was saying it's funny, and I think this is probably likely, like you were saying about the old map showing land at the North Pole. Like if you see shows about them going to the North Pole, which is funny. I watched this show Top Gear back in the day, and I don't know if you saw the clip of that, where they had Jeremy Clarkson, and he brought this little Jesus doll to the North Pole, and you're like, what is he doing if he's not making a point about what we think about that? Because like if you watch shows about the North Pole, it's like literally finding a patch of ice and saying, well, here's the middle. Yeah. You know, plant your flag and say you got to the middle. So it's like, what's more boring than that? There's like nothing there. It's just an ice sheet. That seems like, it seems stupid, because it is stupid. It doesn't seem real. There's something that the reason our compasses point north. There's something significant. Obviously, I'm not sure exactly if geographically Polaris is directly over the North Pole. It could be further north in our realm. Maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But there's something significant about the North. And again, like even like the whole meme of Santa Claus living in the North Pole, like why of all places would you pick that, unless there's something more significant and magical, spiritual about the North than just barren land. Even Superman's Fortress of Solitude is in the North. It was like literally that's where Superman crash landed, was, or that's where his ship was, in the North Pole.
That's right.
How about that?
I thought I did see that Top Gear. I actually watched the whole thing because I saw that clip about the Jesus in the car with them, and they're like, oh, and look on the back, there's a map, and I'm just like, this is too weird. Like, why would you be doing this? But that whole show was such a staged, like it was almost like a car commercial.
Well, the whole show kind of is, but I mean, like it's and he's sarcastic, and they obviously put funny elements in, but like who would get that joke?
Unless you know.
And it looks to a normal Sunday church person that would seem kind of like that. I'm uncomfortable with that. That seems a little bit slightly on the blasphemous side.
Yeah.
But they would have no idea why. But then if you're like talking about the stuff we do, you're like, oh, it's like the, what is it? It's that what's it called? Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's like, oh, he's like drinking his beer, pointing at the TV. Huh? Like I knew it.
Yeah. And when you know, right? It's just that saying. But yeah, I mean, I looked at where they said they were on the map. So they were like in northern Canada. And they're allegedly driving this truck, no gas stations. That area is like as big as Canada's lower area. Like, so if they were to drive from where they were all the way to the North Pole, it would have been further than driving from where they were down to the, it would have been actually past the southern border of Canada. So, and then apparently they were just doing it on like a dog sled and one truck with no gas stations and like no major supplies. I don't know. So it was just a mockery.
So what do you think about the camp of the saints? Because I've kind of gone back and forth about this, because it's kind of like when Jesus says that the kingdom is here, the kingdom doesn't come with observation. Like
Yeah.
I always bring up that in Hebrews, was it 12:22, it mentions that there is a heavenly Jerusalem even before the book of Revelation. That's likely. I even talk about, so David in the Psalms, he talks about Mount Zion and where God is. And it's like, you have to remember, there was no temple on Mount Zion, on the Mount Zion that they built the temple on when David was writing his Psalms. So I believe that there's always been a heavenly Mount Zion. There's always been a heavenly Jerusalem that they speak about. And so I've wondered, like, I do believe that when Jesus died and he was resurrected, he has a physical body that's also spiritual. My thought process is that we could not go to the camp of the saints. It might not be, maybe it is visible to us, but obviously, if you think about, like, when Paul's saying that you have to put on the uncorruptible, you have to take off the corruption and put on the uncorruptible in order to, like, our normal flesh is not going to get into the camp of saints. In my opinion, I don't think so. But I do believe that it's possible, or maybe even likely, that during the millennial reign, the saints would have had powers like angels, and they could have interacted with men, and they kind of did what they did, but they're not. But I don't believe that physical, like normal flesh and blood people like us, who still mess up sometimes, we could not enter the gates of a heavenly city or whatever the camp of the saints would be. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like this topic. It's a very complex topic. And I think something that I read recently, and I'm reading through it, is, well, I read The Pilgrim's Progress, which is a very interesting story of, if anyone here hasn't read it, I encourage you to read it. Have you read it, JT?
No, I have not.
Okay. So it's basically a story, and it was written in the 1600s by John Bunyan, and he was a very scriptural man. He knew his Bible. I think he was a preacher, so he's very intimate with the Bible, and he used it to describe. So the book basically describes this man who's fleeing the city of destruction, and it's kind of on the basis that he knows this destruction is coming. So he sets out on a journey. He actually leaves. He tries to get his wife and children to join him, but they're like, no, don't. We want to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of think he's a crackpot. So off he goes. He's like, well, I'm getting out of here because this is going to be burned with fire. So right away you start thinking, oh, okay, so this is actually talking about, the Gog Magog, like everything's going to be consumed by fire. It's kind of like what he's alluding to, without specifically saying that, because he doesn't, I don't think he quotes Revelation 20 anywhere in the book, but so he sets off on his journey, and he's actually he's been told by this evangelist to look for the wicket gate. So he's going, and he's like going through all these obstacles, and people are trying to kind of distract him from his journey, like taking him into these different places, Vanity Fair, and he falls into a pit and all this stuff. And then he gets confronted by Apollyon. So he goes through a lot of challenges.
He gets confronted by Apollyon? I might have to read this book. Sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then, he ends up in prison. He ends up in court, like as he goes into this town, and they take him to court because he and his friends start walking together, and they're both going to the city. And so they're actually going to the celestial city. This is interesting. The thing, right? Yeah. And so as he's journeying there, he and his friend have discourse, they're talking about all the beautiful things of God and sort of the journey that they're on and the different struggles that they're coming across. And it's deeply scriptural. And anyway, so this evangelist keeps appearing, and he keeps saying, don't forget to look for the wicket gate. And one of my videos is called Straight is the Gate. And he uses this verse actually in the book. Straight is the gate, narrow is the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the word straight, S-T-R-I-A-T, is not the same meaning as straight, like
right.
a ruler. So straight is actually more of a, it's a little bit more complex, but it's a little bit more like there's a location that is founded, and it's kind of straight up and down. So it's kind of giving this feeling of like, to me anyway, and how I'm kind of starting to interpret this is, you know, you're going to go through this gate and you're going to overcome obstacles on this narrow path, and you're going to get to this gate. And you're going to enter through into the opportunity to go to the celestial city, and you'll be told more instructions as you get there. And so it's kind of this, like, I don't know, it's like, it's a little bit of an epic, you know, you're kind of going through these different stages, and finally he gets to the gate, and then they show him the celestial city from this mountain, and he can see it. So then that they head there, but they have to, just getting back to your point about flesh and blood and, you know, entering the city. So they actually come to a river at the end, and I don't want to give too much away, but they actually have to go into the river to get to the celestial city. And his experience of going into the river is more like death.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about baptism, it's like, that's what it's a symbol of. It's like dying,
Right.
coming out as a new creation.
Yeah. So, however, I do believe that there is always a physical and a spiritual component to everything. Again, just going back to the Jacob sleeping and seeing the angels coming up and down on the ladder, and then the Nathaniel story, and just a lot of other stories from the Bible where it's like, no, there's actual portals. And if you read Enoch, like, there's tons of portals up there, right? So my theory is that I believe there's potentially portals. And there's actually this other thing in the medieval times that was depicted a lot in the old art. So the medieval art of the Eastern Orthodox style art. And it's called the Divine Ladder of Ascension. And there's hundreds of depictions of this. So it's usually based on a hilltop, and it'll be like people in a church. So there's like a church, and then there's like a bunch of people kind of just mingling around the bottom of this ladder. And at the top of the ladder, there's like a portal, and then there's like heavenly Jerusalem on a cloud. And then there's this ladder, and it's almost like the way it feels to me. And so there's a spiritual element to that, but there's also the physical element. And so this is why I say, I think there is like clues in all of this. I don't want to say what I think they are, because I could be way off, but I think there's clues throughout the Bible and throughout like artistic history of the church specifically.
Sure.
Because they all show the same thing. They all show like the church, and then they show this ladder, and then they show Jesus literally at the gate in this portal at the top, and he's bringing people in. You know, and then there's an angel there with a crown, and it's almost like they get the crown of life, and then they get entrance into the heavenly Jerusalem.
What if I couldn't help but just think about it, like the two things that were popping in my brain, but especially when you're thinking like a ladder or something, a bridge or something straight up. I was sort of thinking of like the mythologies to the Norsemen of Asgard. And so the way they got down was a rainbow. It was like some kind of rainbow bridge. Obviously, we know that the rainbow, before this month, it was God's symbol of his promise to us. And if you think about even like I'm sure the people here, I probably don't even need to tell them, the Wizard of Oz. There's so much like heavenly Jerusalem type imagery with the Wizard of Oz. You know, sometimes people, I remember when I used to think about it as a kid, I thought over the rainbow was like on the other side of it, but it's like, no, it's like literally talking about above it, like above the rainbow is this other place where there's an emerald city. And as we talked about it, like in the book of Revelation, that there's colors of God's throne. And it's like the Northern Light, the Aurora Borealis, it's this emerald lights in the sky. I mean, I think I agree. That's what that's my thought process too, is that it makes sense that obviously, I think specifically when Jesus is telling the apostles when they're getting sad, knowing he's leaving, he's like, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And then I'm going to bring you where I'm at. So it's kind of like he's ascending up to a place, and then he's going to bring them later. So it's obviously some place that's not like the place we're here. I don't think you could. That's why, like, obviously the very fleshly futurist interpretation of like a physical Jerusalem, like right where they believe Israel is right now. Yeah, Satan's short season does not compute with that mindset, because, like I said, that's how I thought it originally. I was like, well, how is he going to deceive everybody if Jesus is right over there?
Yeah.
You know, like it makes no sense. But again, in faith, you actually have to think past what you can see in order to believe. And it's like God's promise to us is eternal life and a eternal kingdom. So like the millennial reign is 1,000 years, but the kingdom is forever. It's not like Jesus, it's not like during the short season, Jesus leaves the throne and lets Satan sit up on his chair. It's like, no, that's not what's happening. He's allowing the nations to be deceived. He's still reigning. He's, like you said, he's still in charge. The kingdom is forever once Jesus took all authority. He didn't give it back to Satan. He just allowed Satan to do his thing on the earth. But I do think that, like, yeah, I also don't think that, like, we could get there. I mean, I mean, I could be wrong about this. I do not believe that we could physically go there, because I think that it's kind of, I think it's similar to in the way that in the book of Revelation 22 is, it's like that unclean things are not going to be able to enter the gates. And I sometimes wonder this, that many people believe that you have the Feast of the Tabernacles during the millennial reign, but it's like, but does the Bible really say that? Because it mentions in Revelation 21, when New Jerusalem comes down, that kings are supposed to go honor the place after New Jerusalem comes down. Now, I've kind of gone back and forth about this, that I know that Revelation 20 is very chronological. There's an order to it. Everything is done in order. But then Revelation 21 says, the angel says, I want to show you the bride. And he's going to take. So it's kind of like, is that necessary? I guess I'm kind of going back. I'm kind of like talking out of both sides of my mouth. Is when he shows him that, is that after Satan's been thrown in the lake of fire, or is that just another view of Revelation bouncing around chronologically? Did New Jerusalem come down before the millennial reign ended, or was it literally after the new heaven and earth? That's what I don't know. I sometimes wonder that it mentions, that the king's honoring, like going in there and like bringing their, I forgot what exact verse it is, but it's talking about like them basically bringing things to Jerusalem. Then I also wonder how are, if it is a floating city that is not as tangible as like every other city on this earth. Well, how is Satan and the nations going to surround it at the same time? So I've got questions about that. So what are your thoughts?
So it is confusing. I think Revelation 21 is kind of another layer over the top of Revelation 20 and maybe some of the previous chapters. So like
that makes sense to me. I'm open to that idea now. I used to think for sure that it was after Revelation 20, but now I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's almost like he's looking at this happening, and then he's like, okay, and that's also happening, and like,
let me give you a better look of what's happening.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot happening. It's not just one thing at a time happening. There's probably a lot of different like elements to the whole picture, right? So I think people confuse the New Jerusalem with the Camp of the Saints. I don't think they're the same thing.
Oh, so you don't think that is the same thing?
No. Otherwise, why would they distinguish them? So I think that there's two aspects again. So like we're citizens of the kingdom, whether we are still in this fleshly pre-glorified state, or whether we've passed through the veil into our glorified, resurrected form. But we're all residents of the kingdom of heaven. So I think there's an aspect to this again.
Or citizens, because I know it says in Hebrews that we have no home here anymore. We're citizens of heaven.
And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so I think there's just this element to it, like you become a new creation. So we are new creations. We are not yet passed through that veil into the kind of spiritual, the heavenly kingdom, but we're still part of the kingdom. So
Sure.
I think like the camp of the saints, this is how I'm seeing it now. And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm open to being wrong, but I believe Gog and Magog, they are actual. So Gog was the prince of Rosh, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the Old Testament, and I think that's a title. So that belongs currently to the head of the banking in London. So they have this London, the mayor of London parade every year.
Oh yeah, the London, yeah, where they literally have two giants named Gog and Magog. Yeah. Like, you think you've heard it all until I heard that. I was like, what are you talking? Are you serious?
Yeah.
They're the protectors of Londinium. Like, what?
Yeah. So
If you guys have not heard that,
so
yes, to explain them the Lord's Mayor parade in Londinium. Insane.
yeah, and they have representations of these giants all over. Like I think Guildhall in particular is where the giants actually preside over Guildhall. They're like residents there in kind of a symbolic form right now. But yeah, basically, so these giants get paraded around London, the financial district, every year, and it's called the Lord Mayor's Parade. And they're Gog and Magog. Like, you couldn't be more explicit. You couldn't be more like method of revelation. They're telling you
That's
Gog and Magog are based out of London. They're literally based out of London. So that tells me it's a financial component to that whole picture, right? So if you have Gog, who's the Prince of Rosh, well, who's the head of the financial system? It's Lord Rothschild.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gog is Lord Rothschild. And Magog is everyone that's on the payroll. So for me, that's all the secret societies that are running the earth. They are the people that are being coerced or blackmailed or whatever you want to call it into serving the financial mammon, the god of mammon.
Yeah, you can't serve both God and money. That's funny.
Right.
Jesus brings that up specifically.
Yeah. And people get so trapped by it. And I think one way or another, I think they're like the sand of the sea. You go to any small town in the entire world and you will have a Masonic chapter. You'll have a lodge in that town. It doesn't matter where you go. They are surrounding the saints right now around us, right? They are literally in all of our laws. They're in all of our public policies. They're in the schools. They're in the health system. They have taken over everything. And so I say that because I think we are surrounded. We belong to the camp of the saints, whether we're in the flesh or those who have passed on. And I think possibly as well. So I think there is also a possible physical camp of the saints where the literal saints are, right? And I think that may be at the north. So we have this ongoing militarization of the north, like around the north. There's like all these military facilities and building up for, potential war.
Yeah. Did you hear that? I know Vitaly brought that up, like our very first podcast about the short season. He mentioned that there's articles, you guys can go do a web search on this, that they say that potentially if World War III happens, it'll be fought in the Arctic, the North Arctic. And it's like,
yeah,
I said, it's so funny that if you don't know what we're talking, again, like the whole Jeremy Clarkson thing with the Jesus doll at the North Pole, that goes way over your head. Like, why would I care about that? It makes no sense. It's weird. Like, why would anyone care if they fought at the North Pole? Unless there's something way more significant about that place than just polar bears in like global warming and the sea levels rising, melted icebergs. It makes no sense unless, there's some, it's very obvious there's something more significant, whether we're correct about that there could literally be Jesus in the camp of the saints there or not. I mean, it's insane to think about that.
And when you realize that Rupus Nigris, which is the black rock, that's how it translates. And then the biggest company in the world is BlackRock. So all these things are by design. They're not, they're not doing these things for fun. They actually have a plan and an agenda, and they're telling us what it is. So yeah, I think it's a multi-layered surrounding. So if you think as well, it says they come up over the breadth of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they are all over the breadth of the earth. You go to any small town again. So Magog, what I would consider to be anything Illuminati, anything Freemason, anything at those levels, they are surrounding us over the breadth of the earth. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I guess yeah. If you
but
think
out
about it, just as a purely like literal thing too, is that again, as I was trying to transition to another podcast, I was going to call it the Short Season Saints. Like, yeah, that
mm,
like saints are not necessarily Christians who've passed. The saints are obviously the ones who overcome the people who are God's people before. So yeah, like that we obviously before I came to the realization that we're in the short season, I was like, yeah, that we are this whatever this mystery Babylon that appears to be forming again, and maybe this is a cyclical thing with scripture. That yeah, like we are kind of getting closed in between like the people who say what's true and the people who don't, and eventually we're going to be ostracized in a certain kind of way. Way again, as the financial system, you could get into like possibly one day social credit scores, some kind of a digital currency where the people who are on God's side have to, basically can't operate normally because they have to accept some kind of basic income because we've been replaced by AI and machines and whatever. I mean, it's possible that, yeah, that again, these kind of repeating cycles through the world, through scripture, that, yeah, that maybe that's what comes down to, like that we're looking for a specific geographic location on the earth, but it could be a multiple locations over the whole earth. Interesting.
yeah, I think it is over the whole earth. It's just, I guess the question then is, how do they get consumed by fire if they're all over the earth? Like that would be a good question. But I mean, there may be a point where they all gather around the north. Again, I think it's the most likely location for the camp of the saints. I think everything we read about in scripture regarding, Zion and all of that, Jerusalem is at the north. So I think it's the best case. I don't think it's going to be Jerusalem, which your dispensationalists would say, it's there, but I don't think that's it doesn't ring true to me that would be where the camp of the saints would be, and like Gog Magog surrounding it and all of that. I just haven't even thought about that one for a while because I'm like,
No, I don't think that I can still say that I lean toward that Jerusalem being the Jerusalem from the Bible, but also say that I don't think it was ever supposed to be, because I think that if the land of Canaan is where modern day Israel is, I don't think that was a shadow of a thing that God was trying to show them about what was the shadow, of what was to come later. So I don't think it was ever supposed to be there, because again, if God says something's going to be made desolate, He does not really say it's going to be made. There's a heavenly Jerusalem that comes down later. So like that place was left desolate. And to me, as far as my eyes see, it remains so, very much so. Like it doesn't seem like it's changing in that kind of way. Yeah, it is interesting to think about, because I think these are the kind of questions we do have to ponder. But I've wondered too that, like, many people who talk biblical cosmology, when you tell these kind of things to a normie, when they're slightly open to it, they're saying, but why would they lie? What if they would lie that again, you have an Arctic Circle, which a lot of flat earthers would say that is an ice wall. The Antarctica actually goes all the way around. So we've been programmed to believe that Antarctica is south. Well, it is technically south, but if you had a round disc, well, the south, you have one north to the north is in the middle. But if the realm is bigger, the ice wall is basically around where the circuit of our sun goes. What if there's something beyond that? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like where the south actually becomes north, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like if you continue to keep going, like
right.
because I saw that I know I've brought this up many times, that Lost History of Flat Earth, which I loved, and
Yeah.
I know that guy said he, I don't know if it was a psyop or whatever, but what's interesting to me that, yeah, wherever Polaris is, I'm not sure if you went to the magnetic north, if Polaris is directly above. What if Polaris is a little further past that, more north? If that's where, because that actually kind of makes sense. If that's where, like, literally, it would be the dead middle of the realm is where they are, and it's like that we have been taught about the North Pole, but it's like it's literally only the middle part of where the circuit of the sun runs, where Jesus is at. They don't even need a sun. They don't need it because like he's literally lights the place up. I have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts that I have, and I actually have been using. Actually, John Bunyan, who wrote The Pilgrim's Progress, he wrote another book. I think it's called Spiritualizing the Solomon's Temple or something like that, and he uses the Temple of Solomon to describe geographical features that would pertain to kind of the greater cosmology, the biblical cosmology. So very interesting. I haven't read enough of it to be able to comment on that. But one thing I would say is that I think in the Bible, east is an actual location. It's not just a direction. I think east. So when you talk about Cain going east, he was sent to the east. That is an actual geographical area. And I think it's geographical in relation to, say, the Garden of Eden, or the original location of the paradise that God created. And I would say that's kind of like towards your Siberia, Russia, that area. And then you have
Tartaria.
Like, yeah.
Interesting.
So, and then you have the international date line that runs right down that. So on the other side of the international date line would be west. So the west area would actually be on the other side of that. And I think that the portals line up with the international date line, because where the sun rises and goes through the portal, I think is in that area.
Interesting.
Right above there in the firmament. So I think that's kind of the area we're looking at. And like even the stars are fed through portals in the firmament, as is the moon. So all of these things travel through portals. And I think geographically, we have to think about this like really literally. But as far as Polaris goes, I think it is fixed in the firmament. And I do believe that what people call the magnetic north, I don't think that's the Rupus Nigris. Because if you look at the Mercator map, you'll see that it actually identifies where the pole, the magnetic pole is. It's actually right above Siberia, Wrangel Island. And so my thought is, I wonder if straight is the gate is actually right above the magnetic pole, which would be Wrangel Island above Siberia.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Maybe we should branch off into this conversation, because we were talking off air about this, that like a lot of people will ask, okay, so the old maps. Okay, so the old maps are a good example of this. Like, so what kind of history can we trust as people who are, as I said, we're very skeptical of history and like the maps. It's funny. I was even thinking about this too, that this actually kind of like got me onto biblical cosmology, because it's like, it made me think, like, it made me really question what I've been taught about, like when the things were done. It's like, how would they know where all these continents were if they literally, like, how did they get, pretty accurate mapping way back in the day? Unless somebody really, I mean, like, how would they really know? So interesting when people say, well, have all the mountains been moved? Has all the islands been moved out of their places? Like, well, the maps are certainly different than they used to be. Is that possibly evidence of it? Or it's like, or how can we trust the maps? How can we trust the history that we're looking back on? Like what say you?
Yeah, I mean, we have to think about Pangea as well. And I have this suspicion that, okay, in one of my videos, I talked about the Bering Strait, and there used to be land across there. So there was that was just like connected land all across from Alaska to Siberia. And I think there was an event, and I think it's part of this worldwide cataclysm, that made that into more of an open water area. There's all along the West Coast and maybe where you live. I don't know. Do you live in a coastal area?
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, my office is like literally a couple minutes from the beach.
Okay. So yeah, we have a lot of beach around here, and it's just littered with driftwood. How much driftwood do you have where you are?
Not so much. I mean, I think that there is some though, but yeah, not as much.
Okay. So when I was growing up, like 80s, 90s, we come out to the coast, and there would just be mountains of driftwood. Like,
Interesting.
and it wasn't logged. That's not logging wood. It
Mm-hmm.
was not cut. It was not debarked. There were full trunks,
Wow.
and there still are. Like I go out and take pictures of this all the time because these are full trees. Um, okay, so think about if there was a major cataclysm that kind of came down from the north and
Mm-hmm.
blew out that barren land mass there and completely like destroyed the coastline.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect that's what's happened. We still have driftwood that just floats around, and it's not. A lot of it looks like it's even been washed up off of the bottom. I think there's like an Oregon. There's like a report on the Oregon coast where the water, when it goes back, you can actually see old forest in the like on the beach,
Oh, I believe
still
it.
kind of stuck in there, right? So I think there was I think that was part of maybe a more recent cataclysm. And I think they migrated people across. I think they knew something was going to happen. It's possible for me that when the millennial reign was over, let's just say that the north got really icy. So that might be like part of the veil that is there that's kind of blocking us from getting to the Camp of the Saints or into that area. But I just think there was something that that really exploded up there, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe it had to do with this big, like, okay, like now this thing is going to be in place, and all this land is going to be kind of divided now, because I just see evidence of it all down here on the West Coast.
No, it makes sense. I was saying that too. Like, what if the Mercator map with like the 4 islands and the 4 rivers that separate around the Rupus Nigra? Like, what if the newer maps are not wrong? What if that's submerged now? Like, what if that's not actually? I mean, because I think the whole idea of the Bering Strait. I used to always clown on this because I said, is that really? Are they really just saying there's a Bering Strait because they have to try to explain how people were in North America? Because I think that, like, as people like us, we're like, we don't believe the historical narrative, but they have to say, well, how did the Native Americans get here? Well, they walked from from Asia, and you're like, that is the stupidest idea that people just kept like. So, but most of those people went much further south. Like, why wouldn't they have stopped in Canada? Why wouldn't they have stopped in like California and the West Coast of the United States, which is pretty nice? I believe that the Bering Strait was obviously could have been much bigger. Yeah, like there wasn't just this tiny little strip of land that people are walking across. That there was an accessible the earth. The ends of the earth were actually they were connected in some kind of way that men could easily spread the gospel. For instance, like Colossians 1:23,
Yeah.
that all creatures under heaven heard the gospel in the times of the apostles. How is that impossible when we only hear about Paul taking little boat journeys across like the Mediterranean?
Yeah.
There must have been some
And
other way where they could have got there faster.
yeah, and to that point, and just speaking of that area, okay, so here's the crazy thing is I found a map of that region on the Siberian side. There is if you read through, I think it's in Exodus or Numbers, where they're actually talking about the portioning the land to the tribes of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about, okay, Dan's going to be on a coastal area, Naphtali is going to have some of the coastal area, and then it names Mount Tabor, and then it also talks about like some other areas there. I found all of that on the North Siberian map. So it says Naphtali, tribes of
Wait,
Dan.
really?
Yeah, and it has Mount Tabor right there at the north of Siberia, right on that eastern coast. And then it has M. Paul, M. Paul, Paul. And someone commented, well, that must be Marco Polo. But actually, if you go into the Bering Strait, there's a St. Paul's Island. And there's a St. Matthew's Island as well. So again, this is just me saying, I don't know if maybe the locations of, say, the Jordan were actually in a much more big watery area as opposed to this little stream that goes through like this desert in the Middle East, right? Yeah. So that's all very interesting. That's in one of my videos if anyone wants to go check that out. But
well, I have a question after to talk more about like Siberia and Russia again. I threw this out to a couple people. I have not done a ton of research, but I've been kind of fascinated like years ago with like the Russian Revolution and all the stuff that happened in Russia and like the early, you know, like what was it, the Romanovs, and then eventually all that kind of stuff. And I started to wonder, it's like, so obviously modern day Russia would have been Tartary, or like, I think it's sort of interesting. I don't know if you've gone down this rabbit hole, but I was starting to think about like the Russian Revolution, and then during the times of World War I, and then into World War II, like before World War II, I think it was like 60 million Russians were killed like in this time period. And I started to think, is this possibly that they were trying to get rid of the remnants of that? You have the flag of was it the Russia that's like them stabbing this thing that looks like a dragon that was like this literally like the flag of Tartary.
Yeah.
And I started to wonder that, like, is the reason that maybe we have attached the name of, you know, Tartaria to all the old world stuff, which I don't believe it is that possibly that was like one of the last remnants of whatever would be considered? Were they not willing to play ball with the new world order, you know, like whatever the old world order, whatever you would want to call it? And is that why we're told this history of like, oh yeah, Stalin was starving out poor farmers? Like, what if they weren't poor farmers? What if they were like an empire that they like literally were like killing off, and they just, I mean, the amount of death, again, without the devil being behind it, it makes no sense to me. I don't even think people are that bad. That many people, like I said, people can't even fathom that amount of people. 60 million.
Yeah, it's actually that interests me too, and just the fact that St. Petersburg, Russia, you know, like there's a lot of clues. Did you know there's a whole district in northern Russia called Archangel?
I did not know that. That's interesting.
And yeah, there's so many interesting things there. And just the fact that, their architecture is really interesting, like the way that they built the cathedrals. And so it has its own very unique flavor to it. And I think it has been such a powerhouse of the Christian empire, like that old Constantinople Byzantine Empire. That's kind of what you see in Russia is the remnants of that Byzantine era. And something that I did hear, which I thought was really interesting, is that the reason Russia is kind of villainized all these years is because I think they've actually held on to their free energy. They did not dismantle it all. And so therefore it gives them an edge in the world market. If they were shut off all other kinds of power, they could just switch on their free energy. That's what I heard.
Interesting.
Yeah. So,
that makes, I mean, it does make some sense that like there's a reason where I've wondered too, like the guys like Putin, and I know he actually went through like the Klaus Schwab's like young leaders program. So I'm like, I kind of wonder if he's playing a role as the villain here. But at the same time, yeah, like maybe again, what's interesting, like when you look at some of the early pictures that we point out about the mud flood stuff, like St. Petersburg is one of the cities you see where there's no one there. And so like, it's obvious, those are some of the more eerie pictures. I know it's St. Petersburg. I'm not sure what the other Russian city was, but like, yeah, these are the cities that are empty, epic, massive, old world buildings, nobody there. Like, did they clean house there like more than any place? And it makes sense that what does not make sense, again, as history, as we're taught in history, or we're not taught about this empire. For what reason? Well, like, why wouldn't we be taught about it? It's like, it's strange. I mean, like, it's obviously it's a lie by omission. And to me, it's like, talk about they're hiding something massive up there.
Yeah. And the fact that they had to put many, many people in these huge asylums, that's another big, like, head scratcher. You're like, okay, so these guys took over and suddenly there was just these like massive mental asylums all over the world. In fact, my dad grew up near one in Canada here that was established in the early 1900s, and they were actively practicing forced sterilization, and they were bringing people down from the north of Canada. I haven't investigated it enough to know, to kind of have an opinion on what they were doing, but it's very sinister. And I think that as well, like just across the world, I mean, how much of that was going on, as well as kind of eugenics, what were they doing in these facilities that they were, that they had to do this? Like,
well, there's no telling, because they're not telling, but that's a great example though. Like, as you brought up that you said that you said Vancouver.
Yeah.
So like I think that was one of the things that really kind of like made me realize that history was a lie, was the West Coast of America. Because the early times that they told people went over to the West Coast, and you're like, well, how did the cities get so big so quick? And then when you see pictures of Seattle, like, dug out, and you're like, there's a city under Seattle. It's like, when did they do that? And then you find out, like, I think it's in, I'm not sure if it was in Utah or one of these places, there's hardly any people there. They built a castle to be a prison at that early time of this. They're just settling this place, and they made a prison. What you would think of those times, based on like Western movies and all that kind of stuff, they would just shoot those people. They would just hang them. Like, they're going to build a castle to hold them in. Supposedly everybody in the town could fit in the prison.
Yeah.
Why would it be so big?
Yeah.
Because it was already there. I mean, like, that's the only thing that makes sense. It was already there. And what were they doing in a place that's that big? What were they doing? I mean, every wicked thing you could imagine they were doing in there.
Yeah, and you just compare it to what they were actually building at the time, which were basically just wooden houses and nothing too grand. It was like, okay, so now you can build a castle? Like, okay, sure.
Well, it was an architect who won a contest in order to get the job. So they build courthouses that were castles. They built insane asylums that were castles. They built orphanages that were castles, and they built state houses that were capitals. And you're like, and again, this is the time where apparently America is just developing. Where's all the money coming from to do these kind of things? Like, donated land, and they build a castle on top of it. It's like, and they build them in 1 year. I mean, it's like, it's preposterous is what it is. And I think that, to me, I don't know. And I think this was funny, like, as we were talking about the preterism thing earlier, the classic preterists try to allegorize everything and be like, but I'm like, so what do you think about all that stuff? And it's like, well, I haven't looked into that. And I'm like, you need to look into it. Like, I mean, I don't care what side of, like, I don't care if you still believe in the pre-trib rapture. You need to look into that and to, like, wrap your mind around it, at least to try to develop an answer. I'm not saying you have to get the right answer, because I'm not saying we have the right answer for sure. But you have to look into that, because it's like, what if you look into it even a small amount of time, you would realize you've been lied to. And it's like, so why are they lying about all that stuff?
Yeah. And I just reiterate that point that my brother was writing full on preterist journals for, online high level preterist magazines and that. And he'd never even considered anything about what we're talking about. So it just tells me that they're missing a big piece of the story. And in order for them to truly answer the questions, they have to be able to address all of this historical cover up, all the burning of the cities, all the orphan kids, like they have to be able to address all of that within their eschatology if they're going to really get something right.
No, yeah, 1000%. I mean,
yeah.
I just think that, I don't know. I guess sometimes I have to remind myself that I was a blind man up until recently. I didn't want to know. And I think that's the thing. Like, most people don't want to know all the conspiracy things. So even as us who are going down the rabbit hole, I remember not feeling I had time to go down the Tataria mud flood stuff. I think I saw some fake stuff being shared. And so I was kind of turned off at first. And I was like, I don't know. Then I thought, incubator babies, orphan trains, that's Cabbage Patch Kids. Like, okay, all right, I got grown up stuff to look at now. And then you start to look up and you're like, no, that actually is real. As insane as it sounds, that is real. So
yeah.
So what are you to do with that? And you're thinking like the old, the World Fair stuff, and you're like, this makes no sense based on what we're taught. And I think I was just thinking about this today, that so what we be taught is like, what the people would build is like these wooden houses, like similar to what we build today, is they build stuff out of wood because it's not difficult to chop down trees and make wood out of it. And but they also had these buildings made of stone, very ornate places. And you think about it, if these people were worried about the bare necessities back in the day, they're just coming out of the Civil War in America. Like, they're rebuilding burned down cities that were made out of wood, apparently, but they're not made out of wood. Like, when would they have time to build courthouses, state houses, prisons, orphanages, all the things, and make them look, and not to mention the churches that are epic. Yeah. When would they have time to do that? Well, they wouldn't. So who would have time to do that? Maybe if you didn't have to worry about providing food and energy to your home, maybe you could have more time to do. I mean, like, that to me, that's the only way. The free energy actually is the only way it makes sense. That when would people have time to make grand art, music, architecture, all of the things, unless they didn't have to worry about certain things like you and I have to worry about? I mean, like, I'm sure like you and I who have regular jobs, we have to worry about, when am I going to record this? When am I going to edit it? When am I going to do this? I don't have time to do all this stuff. Meanwhile, they are putting details on buildings for what reason? Mm-hmm. And then they're going to demo them, and like, it's not even going to be forever.
Yeah.
It doesn't compute to me.
No. And as well, like, a lot of those areas that have the most ornate buildings are in regions that will have 6 months of snow. Like Russia, for example. I mean, there's just an example of somewhere that has very ornate architecture that would literally be snowbound for 6 months of the year.
Right. That is an awesome point, because as a guy who liked World War II shows, they would even talk about, so you can look this up if you guys are not aware. There was a time where kingdoms went to war with each other. They could not go to war in the wintertime because winter was hard to travel. Even if they go all the way back to biblical times, when Jesus says, pray that the abomination of desolation is not in the wintertime, because guess what? It's hard to travel for primitive people in the winter. So if these people are primitive, which everyone would say that they are, they wouldn't be able to build year round, right? Because they have to be getting their horses or their ox in their buggies and their carriages, and they'd be like stuck in them. Guys said, go watch a show about World War II. So the Nazis, or should I say the Germans from the 30s, when they were pushing into Russia, eventually when winter hit and they did not take over the cities they wanted to, the tanks couldn't even go through certain places in Russia. Even the tanks couldn't do it. Like, they couldn't move their heavy equipment through stuff. Now you're talking about them taking carts, horses and buggies and stuff, and loading massive blocks and bricks and everything millions of bricks onto wagons, and then no, they could not do it. It couldn't be done. That's a great point. And so now you think that they did these buildings in a year or 2 years, they would have had to take like long periods of the breaks off in the wintertime.
Yeah, because you see them, like you see these pictures of allegedly like 1898. They built this massive building in like I don't know, 10 months or something, 4 months. And then but then if you look at the same weather statistics for that year, they were in the heaviest snowstorm of all time. Like, it just, the narrative falls apart no matter which way you look. And I do think that my lunch break, actually, the channel has done a great job, just particularly around the architecture deceptions, because there's so many aspects to this, especially when you're a Christian. You're kind of focusing more on, like, for me anyway, I focus on the historical narrative and where's those deceptions, where have they come from, and how do we dissect all of that, and even the geographical aspect to the kingdom and the camp of the saints and all of this. But yeah, I mean, if you just take one piece of this puzzle, like architecture, and you just look at that, you could go for years talking about this, because I mean, it's just worldwide. It's incredibly insane when you see it, you cannot unsee it. And that's just kind of like I think that's a forming motto in this community, because it's true. Like once you see what's going on, you cannot unsee it. I hold to the stance that the North is actually more likely to be the location of the biblical stories. Just from what I mentioned earlier, some of the maps actually show the names of the places up in that area. And I don't know. So one of my videos is called Straight is the Gate. And it is actually specifically about that area. And it's called the Strait, Strait of Georgia. So the biblical word is actually used in the naming of that spot. And it also is like a very narrow, they call it the Strait, Georgia, the Strait of Georgia. No, the Bering Strait. And it's the narrow gateway to the north. So they use all the words from that scripture right in the naming of that spot. So I just think there's something significant there. The prime meridian goes through there. It is a location that is significant to get to the north. I think and if you look at kind of geological, like the NOAA website, you can find lots of studies that they're actually actively working in that area, going down, drilling down, trying to get like down to the bottom of this, so what they call the seabed. It might be that they're just trying to break through some kind of barrier, right?
Right. Well, no, it's it's the only thing I just even thought about today is that so many Christians today, that we accept the world for what it is, but like it wasn't always like this. If you think about, like, if you read your Bible and you think about how small the amount of people who followed Jesus were, and so even when he had a big following, he gave them a hard lesson in John chapter 6 and sent them away. So he was left with 12 people. And then one betrayed. So you had 11. You only had one go to the cross with them, John, and some of the women went with him. So then he's resurrected. He appears to, I think a lot of people will say it was around 500 people in 40 days. He ascends. But then there's this massive persecution of the church.
Yeah.
But in today's day, there's St. Petersburg, Russia. There's all these places that are named after biblical locations. There's churches everywhere. And I think people take that for granted. And I think that, to me, that without saying it, it's like, isn't this sort of evidence of something that happened that we were not even told about? So what we're just told is that at some point Constantine was like a double cross in the sky or something like that, some vision of Jesus. And then he decided to make the Romans Christian. But I mean, that's a big move, if that's all it was. Yeah. Because literally they'll say even back then that the Christians were this small sect, and then you have then you have like literally it became against the law to be anything else besides a Christian, like that same century. And then everything got named after Christians, saints. It talks about in the Bible that if you're faithful over little, I'll put you over cities. And then you have all these cities named after the saints. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, is that not evidence? There's something. There's something. I mean, to me, that is actually physical evidence. And again, like the churches, it's like that. Again, we're taught these people were like dealing with all kinds of other things, and then they're at the same time they're building these crazy ornate churches. Now, I'm not saying that obviously that some churches today are not about the luxury and trying to, like, you know, specifically like the Catholic Church, adorning themselves with like all these gold and just, you know, living way better than the people. But at the same time, they put a lot of money into these cathedrals, if they were cathodes, if they had something to do with energy. Point being is, if you don't even understand all that, every city in the world basically has this crazy church in it. Like, you know, almost every place in the world. Like, I do think that people don't even process that in their brain because that's the way it's always been. And the difference today is those places are becoming increasingly more empty than they used to be. But there was a time when that people went there because they believed. Like, I mean, so what, like it is crazy to me that like is that not physical evidence of something different than what you have experienced? Because they don't build. If they build a church today, it's like some metal building, you know, and they just build it as big as they can just to pack seats in there so they can fill up an offering plate. But they weren't doing that then. They were doing something different.
Yeah, and what really bothers me, and I'm not saying it's like there's anything inherently evil about this, but I think it's just an evidence of that removal of the energy of God that we would have had as the church back in the medieval times. Because everyone now, all the churches are actually inside and they've closed out all the light. So you're like in these black box churches.
Mm-hmm.
It's so weird to me because if you look at the way that churches were built for acoustic sound and, you know, resonant frequency and all of these beautiful attributes that were all naturally coexisting with like your voice and the sounds that people would have been using to worship God, you end up in a black box with electrical equipment trying to replicate that same feeling, but you're not actually doing it because resonant frequency and acoustics is literal waves of sound vibration. And you would have had the bells and the pipe organs and all these amazing sounds just combining within this building. And people went to them like hospitals, you know, they went there to be healed. It would have been an amazing experience. And then the baptismals as well, probably being fed by like natural spring water from underneath. So you have like such a combination of natural, you know, even the stone is natural, where now, like you say, you know, churches can be built out of steel and all these other materials.
Yeah, well, they had like, the stones likely had obviously sound properties. They had magnetic properties, like electrical properties, where like, that energy could flow through them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because everything carries current, right? So yeah, that's a really interesting conversation.
I know. I was just thinking about that because I was talking about that with a friend about this, that you have like, you just think about like, if you hear like a really good choir in like a really old church, it's almost haunting how it sounds. Like there's something, but there's something about it. It's like, it's mesmerizing. Like, meanwhile, now it's like they try to put up like all the electric guitars and the drums and stuff in the churches now. And it's like a little bit, it's like a rock concert at a church now. And I started to think about this. So I said, one of my big awakenings was watching that movie, They Sold Their Souls to Rock and Roll, or For Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
And so Aleister Crowley influencing all the music. And then you have like the counterculture in the 60s. And like, they say this, and I didn't really think about what they meant until just recently, that like Revolution by the Beatles, like they were going to change the world through music. Were they trying to change it in that kind of way, that that there was a time where music was used for healing and for peace and for glorifying God. And they changed the frequencies, they changed the way it was delivered, the messages in it. And it's like, that has changed the world. It's like, it's brought a rebellious spirit into this place. And like, like, it sounds like a very hippy dippy artist type thing. Oh, we're going to change the world with this song. And it's like, as a person who's like kind of grounded in reality, like, whatever, it's just them trying to be real prideful. But if you think about it, if there is this direction from down below, or on high, like that, this coordinated effort to change the world through music, it's like, wow. I mean, again, if God spoke this reality into existence, and there's sacred geometry through like how he spoke, there's literally this opposite rebellious sound that's infiltrating everything we see now. And it's like, wow, it's kind of crazy. It's crazy to think that like that actually there's a deeper level to that.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to Rick and Kristen on the That's So Fringy podcast recently, and he mentioned something interesting, that the military use frequency machines to control like crowds or populations.
Yeah.
So, if you just set the frequency right, you can actually make everyone either feel sick or fall over, that kind of thing. And then we were talking about Astro World, how it's very likely that they were using frequency of music and sound to carry out what I think would be like a summoning of evil into that crowd, to whatever reason that would be. But
there was even that Lana Del Rey concert over the summer where like, there was that crowd of people just kind of fell over.
Yeah.
Like, was there something going on there too?
Yeah. And if you think about like when you hear music, okay, let's say you're sitting and listening to a harp play. It's not just your ears that are being affected by it. Your whole body is being affected by the frequency, the sound waves. It's like it goes through everything, goes through the wall. People next door can hear it. And then you have Saul in the Bible, who was his spirit was actually calmed.
The liar, David.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then my parents, actually, this is just another point on the music thing. My parents were missionaries in Haiti, where they do voodoo.
Mm-hmm.
And when they would come back to North America, they would hear voodoo in the music, and that was probably back 70s.
And isn't that heavily influenced with like drums?
Yes, yeah. So it's definitely there's a spiritual, and there's certain musics that you say like that lifted my spirit. It actually affects your spirit, and there's a spiritual component to music and frequency and sound. So you can imagine these cathedrals absolutely filled with worship to God, and probably exciting the ether above, and even the ether in the earth, and generating maybe even power that way. But certainly like the healing aspects to that, I think, were probably phenomenal. And it gives you a little glimpse into what the glorified, or the new Jerusalem, the new heaven, the new earth will be like, right?
Yeah.
It's a remnant of something that we can see. It's just going to be amazing.
Yeah, it is cool to think about. Like, everyone knows, like, genetically we're water based. Like, we're filled with like water. Like, I forgot what they say, like our bodies are 80% or something like that. So if you think about the cymatic patterns in water, when there's certain kinds of vibrations and frequencies, versus the wrong kinds, the beautiful patterns it makes when it's done right. And then you think about like the bells that, again, they melted all down during the early 20th century. They got rid of all of them. Like, why were they just doing that? Were they just church bells? It's funny, even like I said, I always go back to the movies and stuff in the comic books, like Venom. Venom is this alien symbiote. He's a demon, is what he is. In the comic books, Peter Parker had to go into a church. The church bells rang, and the vibrations, like the suit could not handle the vibrations, and it left him.
That's right.
It freed him from it. And it's like, so there's like literally you have this demon that's trying to possess him, and he's freed by the sound vibrations of church bells.
Yeah.
It's pretty, I mean, like we could go on it. Well, shoot, my cord came out. No, I was saying
it's like a whole big, it's like an expanding like conversation, isn't it? Because you could just go and go and go and
I know. Yeah, like there literally is. I guess there's no stone we can't uncover, and like and everything to re-examine. Like with this lens, it's like that's what I said. I even have to watch old movies again. I mean, we're talking about like watching Lord of the Rings again, with like Tolkien. What was he writing into that? I used to always think it was a pre-flood mythology, but what if it wasn't pre-flood? What if it was pre-Little Season?
Yeah. Yeah, that one's tricky because they were building up their they were building up in the underground, weren't they? They were designing all their, or like growing all of their hybrid creatures and their almost what looked like chimeras and that kind of thing.
The trolls were digging the trolls were digging too deep in the earth, and they had all these palaces under the ground.
Yeah.
And then as of course, to me, it's like actually we're talking about doing that. It's like you have Sauron. Sauron was dead, and then he's returning.
And the dragon too.
Oh yeah, the desolation. I mean, like there's so many places you go, but anyway, we should probably close it down. We obviously we're gonna have to do this again because again there's so many things to talk about.
Absolutely.
But is there anything you want to close with? Anything you want to promote? Please let everyone know where they can find you at.
I want to say hi to my husband, Will. He's downstairs listening.
Awesome.
But
hi, Will.
I just want to say, just don't be scared to do your own research. Obviously, look into everything that we're talking about. We're all in this together. I'm not a fan of people splitting off into, oh, I like that person, I don't like that person. Like, I think the body of Christ has to be more unified now than ever before. And I think as people start to come to the truth, they're going to come closer to these realizations. There's going to be more people coming. It's going to be like a dam that just breaks. And I don't know when that's going to happen. I hope it's soon. But, we see the elites scrambling to cover their tracks but it just seems like a futile effort on their part. So I just encourage everyone to really band together. We are all trying to represent Christ. Sometimes we get our facts wrong. Sometimes we get, our understandings of things wrong, and that's okay. Like we're trying to find the truth. And as long as we are aiming for that and we're seeking the Lord and we've got the Holy Spirit on our side, I think we're all going to get there. So thanks, GT, for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. I could not agree more. I was saying that what I have enjoyed about this is that I've been on YouTube a little over a year now. And as I've been bouncing around the other little social media apps, I feel like I found a real community here. And I said, obviously, I appreciate all you guys who are in here. And obviously, that's why I said it's cool that everyone's like, oh, you got to have Leaving Babylon on. It's like, oh, she's in the chat. I was like, oh, yeah, definitely. And that to try to find the little differences in us and to say, oh, well, I don't like this person. I think that most people I have found in this community, you have to have a bit of curiosity. You have to be a bit humble, because again, if you're too prideful, how can you learn anything in this space? We really have to understand that we had to come to this realization because God opened our eyes. It's not because we're great. It's not because we're so smart. It's because that God finally lifted the scales from our eyes. And we, again, as I said, that when you see somebody who's not quite where you're at, you have to say, they'll get there. It's better to give them the benefit of the doubt. They'll get there. I don't have to X them. I don't have to do this. I say that what I really see is I see a desire of people to get to the bottom of the thing. I think these are fun discussions. I think it's obviously speculating about the camp of the saints, where obviously we hope to be one day. We hope New Jerusalem, all the things. That's the goal for all of us. And obviously, if we're in Christ, then that's where we're all going to be one day. It's that we don't get into petty squabbles about, oh, well, no, it's not. That's the real Jerusalem. This is this and this. Come on, guys. Like obviously, the main part is our hope in Christ, and obviously we pray that everyone gets there with us, and then one day we'll get to say, so-and-so was right. His videos were pretty good. No.
Exactly. No, that's good. That's awesome. Amen. Thank
What?
you.
Well, anyways, you guys follow Madeline, Leaving Babylon. Again, her obviously her links are in the descriptions. You support her on Patreon. I know obviously the videos she does, these things take time as us having regular jobs. Do what you have to, do what you'd like to do to support us. But I really just appreciate you guys being here, because that to me is enough, because this is so much more fun when we have all you guys here to enjoy this conversation, because to me it's like this is a blast.
Yeah, so much fun. I love all my subscribers. Like, I have the smartest people on my channel. I mean, I don't know, I haven't studied yours, but the comment section on mine is just crazy. I love reading it and communicating with people. So yeah, keep it up, guys.
No, that's a fact. I said, once you start to get to here, I'm so used to dealing with people on TikTok that when you get over to YouTube, when people are following all your videos, like, do you guys help teach me so many things? And I said, I learned, I don't know how many videos I've even made through other means where like somebody said, how about this? How about this? And I'm like, well, I didn't even know about that. So I go, look, you guys teach me stuff all the time. But oh yeah, I got something cool to promote. I said, I think I'm supposed to do a live with Paul tomorrow, possibly earlier in the day, understanding conspiracy. But on Thursday, I saw Jay Dreams in here. We're going to talk Fallout. We're going to get deep into the weeds of the symbolism. And I know he's into the movie stuff, so I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy it. I'm going to direct that conversation, obviously, into the little season as much as I can, and to try to really find out what's true through the fiction. So anyways, guys, I really appreciate you guys in here. I appreciate you being here, Madeline. I love talking to you. And I said, obviously, if you want to come back, you're welcome anytime.
Yay. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Well, all right, guys. God bless y'all.
Bye.
Yeah, so I think that went well.
Yeah, we covered a lot. I wasn't expecting to talk about so many topics, but